So this is your inaugural appearance on Blogging Heads on UN Plaza, this program in particular. I guess maybe by way of introduction, explain sort of how you fit into this universe, what it is you research and do, and then we can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, well, I'm trained as a political scientist, and I'm based at the Political Science Department at University of Massachusetts Amherst. But I describe myself as a human security analyst, which means I write and teach and blog about the intersection between human rights, military affairs, and humanitarian law, both at Lawyers, Guns, and Money, but also at Duck of Minerva and Current Intelligence, in fact. And so, to me, it means I'm looking at security policy not from the perspective of how to protect state institutions or territorial borders, but rather how well our security policies are working to protect individuals, particularly civilians. So the assumption that I bring to my work is that a well-run security sector is indispensable to the promotion of human rights, but that we can't take that for granted. And so I'm studying all of the different social currents, both within the defense establishment and also outside of it in global civil society, that are aimed at bringing security policy more in line with human rights law.
Now, as sort of a academic field, this idea of human security sort of is a post-Cold War institution, is it not? I remember reading an article, I believe by Jessica Matthews, that was sort of kind of laid the groundwork for this, right? The sort of paradigm shift in security.
Yeah, Jessica's work was very focused on the NGO sector and how global civil society could teach the state system new norms and bring those ideologies to bear. But I think that the concept of human security is older than that article. It goes back to, it's a creature of the UN, in fact. Boutros Ghali came up with this in his original Agenda for Peace, back right at the end of the Cold War, as you say. And I think that if you think of human security broadly, as I do, it actually predates the creation of the term. I mean, governments for a very long time, since back in the 19th century, have cared very deeply about humanitarian law, sort of rules that guide the conduct of militaries in the field. Humanitarian intervention is an old concept, even though the idea that it's legitimate in certain cases is new. So it really depends on how you define human security, and in the academy there's a lot of debate about what the term even means. Should it be, is human security about securing civilians from bodily integrity violations by their states, by their governments, or is it also about economic security, food security, the freedom from want side of it? So academics take different perspectives on this, so do governments. It's a big schism between Canada and Japan, for example. The Canadian approach to human security, very focused on genocide prevention, among other things. For the Japanese, they would focus much more on poverty reduction. And so, I mean, one question I have for you is whether this term has sort of fallen out of favor in UN circles. It seems to me, as an outsider, that it has, and you're following some of what's going on at the UN much more closely than I am on a regular basis. So I wonder if it's sort of fallen by the wayside. If so, why? And if so, is it making a comeback or likely to do so?
An interesting way of looking at this is looking at Somalia, which is kind of popped up into the news this week because of a report that the Security Council authorized these investigators to go check out Somalia, look at things like, is arms smuggling going on? What's the state of play with the sort of with the insurgent movements? What is the international community doing to help the situation? And what's going on with piracy there? It was a pretty wide-ranging report.
Yes.
That offered that offered a really sort of spotlight onto a lot of uncomfortable issues for the UN in many ways. One of the headlines to come out of this report was that the World Food Program was allegedly diverting some of its food aid to insurgents, or to put it maybe more accurately, sort of aid was leaking to groups that were opposed to the government, like Al-Shabaab and all that. And I was wondering, so you had a chance to read the report. I was wondering sort of what your thoughts were on it in general and on this World Food Program issue more specifically.
You know, as I read the report, my initial reaction, and also the news coverage of it, my reaction is, what's the fuss, right? I mean, is this not par for the course in any humanitarian context where you need to get aid to civilians or hungry people? But in order to get access to them, you need to work with the authorities that exercise control over the territories in which they're embedded. And in parts of Somalia, quite frankly, that's not the central government, that is, or the official government. It is militias, it is groups like Al-Shabaab in the south. And so it strikes me that there's nothing so strange here or so unexpected, and this is the same thing that aid workers had to do in Bosnia to get food to Bosnian Serb or Bosnian Muslim civilians. In Sudan, you have to work with the government to get aid to Darfur. So I guess my question, what do you think? Why now would the United Nations be sort of zero in on World Food Program for doing exactly the same thing that is one of the cornerstone dilemmas of humanitarian aid work in general?
Right. I think what this report does is sort of highlight, a key tension in a lot of, the delivery of humanitarian aid, but also a key tension in Somalia, specifically. So the UN has a political agenda in Somalia, and that is to prop up the transitional government of Somalia. And, they have a political office for Somalia that I think is based actually in Kenya because of the security situation. There's an African Union peacekeeping force in Mogadishu that's basically keeping the transitional government up and running, is providing security for them. And so, the goal from a political and economic development side is to do what you can to strengthen the government. Now, the World Food Program is an apolitical organization. They have a single goal, and that's humanitarian. They just want to deliver food to needy people. At times, as you can see, at times, if that humanitarian goal conflicts with the political goal, then, so be it. For example, I've heard stories that the World Food Program, in order to more expeditiously get food to the areas of Sudan controlled by Al-Shabaab, where a lot of hungry people are, they would bypass the port of Mogadishu. The problem is the port of Mogadishu is controlled by the transitional federal government, and they want to be the conduit for aid. But the World Food Program says, our goal is not to prop you up. Our goal is to feed hungry people. And unfortunately, as you said, that sometimes includes dealing with unsavory characters. I think there are, maybe moral and political compromises to be made on both sides. It's not a clear-cut one is better than the other because, in the end, in the long term, Somalia will only recover if its political institutions are strong enough to take care of its own people. So I think there are certainly two sides of this coin, and it's a pretty complex issue. I think. I mean, let's offset Somalia. Do you want to move on? So you had some.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the piracy piece of the report.
Oh yeah, pirates. You love. We actually both wrote pretty much the exact same blog post, which are words long. But I'll let you summarize what we both did.
It's the pirates business model piece on page 99, where the report basically describes the pirate industry as essentially a capitalist enterprise where locals can invest in pirate operations for a share of the take, and it's really fueled the economy there in ways that have been much more lucrative for local civilians as well as sort of these maritime brigands, and has reliance on humanitarian aid, frankly. So I don't know. I think there's some interesting conclusions you could draw.
No, agreed. I guess what I thought, when you say pirates, people, tend to think of this ragtag band of, swashbuckling sailors. But what this, short, it was really in the annex of the report, sort of described was a very, complex business model where people are apportioned shares of the profit. And there's, minus, the overhead costs and all that, and they're distributed among, people based on a predetermined formula. And it was, it's just an interesting, I think, insight into, like, as you said, the business model of how this of this one important part of the informal economy.
Yeah, I mean, Somalis, I think the report gets the tone right. I mean, sometimes there's some hysteria in the press and in analytical reports about piracy driving the humanitarian crisis or political crisis. And I think the report makes it clear that piracy is a symptom, not a driver. And Somalis tend to see the pirate economy as a very small part of the broader political and humanitarian crisis. So in some places, pirates are seen as a bad influence, but in other places, they're just seen as legitimate businessmen or stable future husbands for daughters and even lucrative investments for locals. There's this great story I heard on a conference panel at the International Studies Association this year about a divorcee in Somalia who received her husband's rocket-propelled grenade as part of her divorce settlement. So she loaned it to a maritime militia in exchange for a share of the booty, and when they took a ship and got the ransom, she was able to turn 75,000 US dollars on her investment. So when you consider that the alternative for locals is often unemployment or agricultural sector in which they have to compete with the aid community or dependency on foreign handouts themselves, which a lot of it is being siphoned off by warlords, right? It's hard to make the argument that the pirate economy is necessarily bad for human security, especially since Somali pirates, at least, though not in some other parts of the world, Somali pirates tend to treat their captives quite humanely. There aren't a lot of deaths, and it's basically a way they see themselves as sort of local Robin Hood characters, where they're trying to extract back from the global capitalist system some revenue, given that they've lost their livelihoods due to illegal overfishing and the failure of the international community to enforce environmental regulations around their borders.
Okay, sorry about that brief interruption.
Not at all.
I wanted to ask you, so I guess what then does the emergence of this pirate economy tell you about, how a sort of lasting solution to Somalia might be achieved?
Well, I think it tells us a couple of things. So one is the report talks about how pirate attacks are still increasing despite the fact that you've got quite an enormous armada, presumably to deter pirate attacks, there in the Gulf of Aden now. But what it also points out is that successful pirate attacks are decreasing. So the chances of a pirate actually succeeding in an attack has gone down. And I think from a political economy perspective, this suggests that the Somali piracy might just become decreasingly lucrative for these individuals, and we'll see it peter out due to market forces and this law of diminishing returns, even if the international community does nothing other than continue to take steps to make sure that attacks fail. And it's interesting if you look at the kinds of recommendations the UN Security Council report makes versus, again, the Council on Foreign Relations report by Bronwyn, blanking on her last name. Anyway, the CFR report to which I was referring. Mm-hmm. The Security Council report emphasizes, a need to take renewed measures to prosecute and apprehend pirates, send them abroad to be tried and such. But the Council on Foreign Affairs report focuses more on what not to do instead of what to do, what else to do. What not to do would be, do not use a policy of drone attacks or military strikes to take the battle onto land, right? Don't militarize counter-piracy efforts or attack their outposts, because this could very well radicalize them. It could threaten civilians in those areas and create the very pirate-terrorist nexus that some security analysts fear, but which really isn't evident so far. And I mean, what you might think about doing is, through the United Nations, is instead of going after pirates, go after illegal fishers. I mean, there's still quite a lot of illegal fishing that's going on in Somali waters. I think I read a statistic like some $450 million in illicit catch per year, 800 illegal vessels in Somali waters at a given point in time. And of course, the Somalis don't have the Coast Guard or the Navy to police their waters effectively themselves. But suppose the UN Security Council passed a resolution asking member states to focus on that, it would also decrease the demand for piracy, because they've set themselves up as presumably this response to illegal overfishing. So I think there are some ways that you can, again, adopt a position of neutrality and just allow market forces in the country to go to take their logical course without necessarily going after individuals who are often seen as heroes in the local society.